Our next presenter is Mark Pascoe from Dolby, and he will talk at least to related issues. How do you manage loudness in a multiplicitous world with so many platforms, so many areas to look at where your content can be delivered upon. Mark, please.
Thanks, Florian. Yeah, thanks for that introduction. Yeah, my name is Mark Pascoe. I work at Dolby Laboratories here in London, and I'm in the broadcast technical marketing group now. I've known some of you for quite some time, and I've just had a little bit of a change in job, so it's good to see you all again. So this multiplicitous word, we had a little bit of a discussion as to what it actually meant when I decided I was going to use it in my presentation. So I looked it up on our good friend Google. Multiplicitous, it's an adjective giving rise to or resulting from multiplicity, which tells us essentially nothing. It's actually a law term that's used quite frequently in law, so that's obviously why Dolby are using it, due to the amount of IP we have. So I looked up multiplicity on our good friend Google again, and that gave us the quality or state of being multiple or various and a great number. So essentially we still were none the wiser. But we had a little bit of a conversation internally. Obviously we had to have an email thread of about 4 or 5 people as to whether I should use this word or not. But in the end it came down to my decision, and I decided to go with it anyway. Essentially just for 2 very good reasons. Firstly, I wanted to hear Florian say it, and he actually did a very, very good job.
Pronounced it correctly.
Twice. Yeah, you covered me very early on there, so thanks very much for that. And I especially wanted to use it because he's a Germanic speaker, and we all know how difficult some Germanic speakers can find to say words that they really should know about. And secondly, I wanted Dolby to be known for an M word other than metadata. So I decided to use multiplicitous, and I thought that was a second really good reason for actually just using the word, which leaves us with this non-equation, which you'll be pleased to hear from a Dolby technical presentation, is the only equation I'm going to be using today. This equation, multiplicitous, is unequal to metadata. Or is it? We'll be finding that out hopefully during the course of this discussion. But what do I mean by multiplicitous, most importantly? What I mean is that we have a whole bunch of different creative bodies, a whole bunch of different content from these various content providers. And that can be distributed by a whole number of means. I've left kind of some cinema stuff on here as well, so the path and the UIP. But also obviously via broadcast, which is what we're going to be talking about a lot here. So we have not only the operators here, but also the encoders that they may also be wanting to use. Regarding playback, I've also left the cinemas on here as well, we have up at the top. But again, this discussion is going to be focused more around the rendering devices in broadcast, but also around the mobile devices and those portable devices that we also might choose to use around the home. So just a very short agenda, hopefully today. Who's taking responsibility for the loudness that we're going to be discussing? And I'm going to be discussing these particular points and Dolby's approach to them most specifically, just as a little bit basis for the conversation. Going to be looking at management in vertical platforms and just how difficult it is, even if you have the entire control over the entire platform, and also just a very short about what I called a near vertical platform here. What's very important with regard to loudness, as we've heard previously, is actually dependencies between the parties in the entire content chain, and how, regardless of whether we do something very good in the content production, if that's broken somewhere along the line, the whole thing has been thrown away. And also just hear a little bit on minimum requirements and how they're good and bad in the same breath. And just right at the very end, a little bit about loudness control through diverse ecosystems. So these are the sort of people, the companies and organizations that can actually facilitate loudness consistency. So we've got people who make measuring devices up there, the standardization bodies, which Andrew gave an excellent précis of the work that's done there, the glue manufacturers, and also the encoder manufacturers, and also very importantly here the CE manufacturers, and that's something I'll come on to very lately. So all these people need to work together to achieve the loudness nirvana that I know Florian covets so very much. I really tried to get at least something from all the manufacturers that are in the room, but apologies if I missed you. I think I've missed MC and I think I've missed Lara as well, so apologies for that. So what are Dolby's kind of feelings on these particular parts and loudness throughout the ecosystem? So Dolby actually have a long history in the power-based measurement, in the measurement of power-based loudness. So it's long been clear that kind of simple electrical measurement that's provided by, for example, quasi-peak program meters is actually less than useful for the measurement of perceived loudness. And developments to try and find the best fit for this actually led us to invent the automated dialogue gating that we've been hearing about just a very short time ago. So this allowed us to kind of isolate just the vocal parts or the main part of the vocal parts of the audio content to be measured in isolation. So normalizing to this value gave us results comparing well with the mixed items of content, but also using standardized methods of loudness measurement on just the vocal elements of a program gave birth actually to dialogue intelligence. So we gate out the dialogue, and then we just measure that separately. However, it's also obviously clear that using dialogue gating on content without a vocal element, as we heard with the Michael Jackson track a moment ago, is going to give less than ideal results. And additionally, the algorithm is less than perfect. We had some particular issues with Swedish dialects that I know our friends at SVT were very keen on us solving. But however, so the EBU PLOUD group actually put together an alternative schema to measure just the foreground elements of all this material. And this work resulted in the program loudness measurement that we now have in R128. We have heard previously from Florian and others that this measurement doesn't necessarily fit with the ideal of having coherent and equal speech loudness between pieces of content as well. And we've heard also that this delta can also be reduced by reducing the dynamic range of this material, but there are ways of doing that, and I think Richard might come on to discuss how that might be done later on, so I'll leave that as a side for the moment. So loudness normalization has, with metadata-driven delivery, seemed a little bit of a less than necessary step, reducing the signal-to-noise ratio for the lower dynamic range material, and limiting the same for the high dynamic range material. However, with the aim of simplifying the production process, as we've heard from others, and the distribution of the content in the professional domain, and with the ever-increasing dynamic range of production systems, broadcasters have decided that using a fixed target reference level is the way to go. And Dolby, of course, are able to support this, while still maintaining the support for the wider dynamic range material required by some pieces of content, most notably the long-form dramas, the movies, and perhaps even some classical music as well. Within distribution, we continue this support. So the average loudness level has been and can still be indicated by the dial norm parameter within AC3 or EAC3, or with the program reference level parameter within MPEG-4 AAC. Now, some broadcasters choose to fix this value, and that is absolutely fine by us as well. But with a fixed target and loudness level, there is also, therefore, the fixed headroom issue. And it might first appear that this is actually not particularly helpful, and that the dynamic range control requirement is actually diminished. But especially when using multi-channel material, we might also find that dynamic range control actually becomes a necessity. But I think someone else is going to touch on this later on in the day, so I'm not going to touch on it any more there in the interests of time. So I want to give a little example of the way that loudness might be managed in a vertical platform. And so I've chosen to discuss the most vertical platform we have here in the UK, owned and operated by the British Sky Broadcasting. But also, just to give it a bit of a hybrid feel and to try and not show too much bias towards one particular pay TV operator, others are available here in the UK. I've also included some functionality that can actually be found within DirecTV's platform over in the US. Just by the way, putting these two logos together doesn't mean necessarily that there's any particular connection between the two. Now, even in this example, we might even see that it's quite difficult to maintain control over all parts of the ecosystem, especially with the kind of bring your own device sort of targets that operators are trying to target at the moment. And additionally, as it says here, I grossly oversimplified the way that the program flows through a particular broadcast infrastructure, mainly just so that I don't have to do too much work and you can still read the diagrams with a small font that is already required. So when I say a gross oversimplification, the things I'm really talking about are that I'm not including any issues like digital rights management or kind of the conditional access or the transcription that might be required in the use cases that I discuss here. I'm also assuming that implementations are able to decode and transcode the sort of bit streams that we're talking about, and also that, quite importantly, actually middleware is not a blocker to some of these use cases. Just as an aside, and to show that I'm not completely anti-middleware, we've included in your packs a little USB stick, and on that you'll actually find some work that we've done together with our friends at NDS about loudness alignment techniques within NDS middleware and Dolby audio decoders. So please do read that if you're interested, and if you're not interested, it makes very good bedtime reading, I'm told. So let's get on with this example. I chose to go with just having in my mind a feeling of this movie, which some of you may realise is A Few Good Men, for no other reason that it's actually a piece of material that we use to demonstrate Dolby Digital Plus functionality on the AceTrax over-the-top platform, and also just because I really wanted to show this picture. So here's where we start in a typical broadcast infrastructure. We've got our content. Broadcast here is what we might just term as encoding and distribution. We have a receiver in the home. In the case of our friends over at Sky, it's the set-top box. And in this case, I've decided to connect it to an AVR. So this is clearly a well-heeled audio expert. So the first thing we're going to look at that is a little bit of an aside to this is content delivered via VOD. So that's either pushed to the set-top box, the PVR rather, or potentially pulled as well via an IPTV service. However, this is typically just using the same bit streams that we might use over broadcast. So this is just really as an aside to say I haven't forgotten all about it. The second route is via OTT, so this is via the open internet, where we may want to have this content delivered to a portable device, a mobile phone or a tablet, for instance. Now, I think we've seen a little bit earlier that there may be some proponents that suggest what we want to do is therefore reduce the dynamic range or the loudness range of this particular piece of material for delivery to this device. But that is not something that I would necessarily advocate, and we'll see why that will be the case very shortly. Also, this OTT service could address a television directly, as mentioned before with the AceTrax example. And we may want to connect this TV directly to our AVR. So we're seeing already that there's a number of routes in for this same piece of content over various platforms, all ending up on the same device, even though we started with the same piece of content. So this is what I mean by a multiplicitous world. Now, where this really gets interesting is where we're considering, okay, well, I want to take that OTT signal and I want to actually store it on my portable device, forgetting about DRM, conditional access, and transcripting, clearly. And I want to take that mobile device elsewhere and actually connect it directly to an AVR. Now, if we limit the dynamic range of the piece of content that we delivered via this OTT service, let's not forget this might be via 3G, for example, and I plug it into my AVR, do I really want to hear the dynamic range that I was delivering to this portable device so I could still hear it on my aircraft or on the tube in the morning while I've got someone next to me blaring out Metallica on their headphones so that everyone else can hear it? I would think probably not. What we'd want to do is deliver the entire dynamic range and then consider having some sort of helper data to reduce that dynamic range in the rendering device. Also, let's not forget that we might actually want to take something that we've recorded on the receiver already, which would hopefully have the full dynamic range because we're expecting to replay it on our AVR and actually play it on the portable device. Again, it would really help us to have this helper information that moves from the receiver into the portable device along with the full dynamic range program. And this is what Dolby call dynamic range control. So important to realize that dynamic range control, especially within AC3, within EAC3, and even within MPEG-4 AAC, is simply a level control. It's simply a gain control, a piece of metadata that goes along with the audio that either increases or decreases the level at the rendering device. So we can see that it's not simple to be able to do this, but I think it's something that Dolby for certain can actually kind of help you with if you have some interest here. Of course, we might want to take this portable device and put it into our TV as well, so that is also another scenario. But just to summarize here, what I'm trying to say quite inarticulately is that rendering devices actually do not form a one-to-one relationship with platforms. And this is borne out by the example of trying to deliver via an OTT mobile doesn't necessarily mean that that content is going to be rendered on that particular device. We might want to play it into the TV or into an AVR, for instance. Additionally, I feel that content shouldn't be delivered to any potentially intermediate device with that reduced dynamic range. So what I mean by that is any device which can buffer the content. So that's either a PVR or a device that can hold content for side loading, for instance. And also any device which can be connected to an AVR. So for example, a mobile phone or a portable device again. So rendering that reduced dynamic range before delivering content is only going to satisfy the lowest common denominator by the example that I just said a moment ago. Rendering for that mobile phone and plugging it into an AVR, we're just going to get a reduced dynamic range and therefore a less engaging experience. Delivering that full dynamic range of a wide dynamic range material without any helper metadata is equally as painful because this is going to place some heavy demands on the rendering device in terms of having to reduce that dynamic range. In addition to this, we also know that the original content vendor has no way of knowing which device that material is going to be replayed on. So they have no idea how that's going to be rendered on this downstream device. Just very quickly, I want to talk about loudness management in an almost vertical platform. So what I mean here is a horizontal platform where there's a single operator who is also a broadcaster and has a great deal of influence over the minimum receiver specification. So one that I work with quite well and quite a lot is Teracom in Sweden. So that's really the Swedish government along with SVT. So they are a broadcaster, they're an operator, they're the only operator on that particular platform. And the technical guy at Teracom also is the head of the NorDig technical committee. So they have a very large influence. But I'm going to actually speak about what I think it's called BBC Free to View, which is the HD DTT service. So I have a little anecdote for you just about this particular service. I actually use my TV in my bedroom as an alarm clock. Now, the alarm is set to BBC One SD because currently that particular service, the HD service, isn't available in all regions. And my alarm comes on just as the local news comes on. So I want to hear the local news, but I also want to actually be woken up, not just have a holding page until we go back to the national news. Now, if I want to watch Match of the Day at the end of the day without waking my wife, what I tend to do is switch over to the HD service. And the reasoning for this is really because if you look at the SD service and the HD service on my particular device, they are not loudness aligned. So I'll switch over to the HD service, and this actually gives me a little bit more resolution on the volume, and my wife doesn't get too annoyed by me watching Match of the Day at the end of the day. I'm not a big football fan, so it sends me to sleep quite quickly. So what I just want to kind of make out here is, we've got the best public funded broadcaster in the world here in the UK, and if the BBC can't sort this out 100%, then what hope is there for the rest of us? So in summary, it's kind of a virtually impossible task, and note here, without a lot of help from people throughout the rest of the ecosystem. And that's really what I want to move on to now, and the dependencies between these particular parties in the content chain. So another short anecdote here. I actually went to a conference on accessibility on Wednesday, which was a fantastic conference, and I would recommend people like kind of look it up and go to it next year if they actually run it. And they were discussing where responsibility should lie for actually ensuring that those with an aural or a visual impairment are actually able to access the same content with people without those impairments. Now, one suggestion was that the responsibility should lie with those that extract money from the value chain. And I think maybe, you know, the same could apply to loudness. But who extracts the money from the value chain? Well, it's really kind of everyone in it, which brings us back around to the situation where we say that it's everyone's responsibility to enable loudness normalization. But there's just like kind of one little area that I want to discuss here, and that is really about the platform operators. And to a certain extent, I feel that, you know, they really provide a service to the content vendors. And therefore, you know, do they actually even want to be involved with loudness? Now, I'd speak to some platform operators quite recently, and what I tend to feel from them is that they would rather just take in media and pass out that same media. In the digital domain, it's a lot more simple for them. They don't touch it, and therefore don't necessarily have any responsibility for it. So I think unless those platform operators can show a real value in a service offering in terms of loudness normalization at the platform operator area, it's going to be very difficult for them to make a worthwhile impact. Lastly, I want to talk about these continued dependencies within the content chain. So regardless of whether audio is touching the ecosystem, there is the opportunity to mess up the good work that's been done upstream. So if the content is correctly normalized, encoded, and distributed with care, there's still the opportunity to cause issues in the consumer premises equipment. But as we've seen, there are multiple paths into these devices, each potentially using different codecs or potentially no codec at all. And the end device is expected to pick up the pieces of those diverse deliveries and fragmented methodologies and ensure that they're all delivered at the same loudness, regardless of the sonic capabilities of the rendering device. So I'm happy to discuss the point, but in my mind, this puts a lot of responsibility on the CE vendors themselves, much of which they've actually had little say in. So, as an example, I don't believe that there was any representation from CE manufacturers at the latest PLOUD meeting. Now, I understand that it's P for production, and therefore, you know, this may not be exactly the right place to have it. But, you know, we're making a lot of decisions in these sort of fora that actually has a large input on the CE manufacturers. So I think, you know, just as a suggestion, it might be worth having a closer association with the relative organisation Digital Europe, and perhaps have a rapporteur between the two groups. 5 minutes, great, thanks. I also want to talk about EBU Tech 3344. So it's mostly written by Richard, who's going to speak later. And it's a fantastic source of recommendations in this particular area. It's trying to cover any and all eventualities in the distribution and consumers world, and it's become, without any doubt, the most complex document in the set, to such an extent that adhering to all the recommendations is an almost impossible task. So my summary here is that it would be really nice to involve the CE manufacturers a little bit more in this exercise. And yeah, please consider the manufacturers. Lastly, I wanted to talk, very briefly, I think we're going to have time, about minimum receiver specifications. So these are the sort of documents that are put together by a lot of work, by generally quite a few people, and ensure compatibility and interoperability between different manufacturers' receivers in a horizontal market. So since this is a complex task, frequently the big jobs are done first, in this case, the video. It's only after a platform is launched that it's frequently realized that there are still issues with the audio. So I use the Freeview HD launch as an example here when I talk about this. When the platform was actually launched, the demonstration set-top box didn't actually switch correctly from multi-channel audio to stereo. From what I understand, the audio in the center LFE and the left surround channels was left in the buffer and was replaying once moved to the stereo service. So this is just an example of where these things are required. Also, the output of surround audio from the set-top box wasn't even mandated, and that's something which, again, came along later once we had some discussion about it. And loudness was a very significant issue at the launch of the platform. I was speaking to someone at lunchtime about what I think is probably the same loudness issues on a newer platform as well. The particular issue that we had here was that any multi-channel audio was down-mixed to stereo, and then there was a pad of 8 dB put on that. So this is not too bad when you're listening to a particular service, but if within a single service you're moving from 5.1 audio, as an example, to stereo, and you get a jump upwards from when you're listening to down-mixed 5.1 to stereo, for example, listening to a movie and then listening to adverts, this is fairly objectionable. And this is even when the adverts have actually been loudness normalized. So the DTG set up an audio task force to try and cover these sort of areas. I think it's just a measure of how much importance the DTG eventually assigned to this, that we had a task force rather than the normal working group. One thing I just wanted to point out here is that, testing in this respect doesn't just mean the conversation. Is there audio? Yes, great, then it's passed. We need to be very careful about testing in this area as well. So to summarize here, I just wanted to say, if you're writing minimum receiver specification, please listen to the audio experts when writing specs. We're not trying to make life difficult. We're just trying to make sure that the requirements fit both the content producers and everyone in between there, and the CE devices as well. And you never know, we might be able to even help get the video in sync with the audio at some point in the future. So just as a last summary with regard to dynamic range control, I feel, and I think Dolby feel as well, it would be good to be able to deliver the entire original dynamic range along with some helper signaling to indicate to the rendering device the best dynamic range for the material when rendered on this particular device. So there is space, and it's something I haven't spoken about too much today, for some single-ended loudness control in consumer devices. But this is placing a lot of emphasis within that device, using a lot of horsepower. And if we consider a mobile device, for instance, where the majority of this processing is going to have to be done, we're asking the processor to do a lot, which of course has impact on battery life ad infinitum. So it would be nice if there was some intelligence in a single-ended solution also, so as not to mess up what's being done upstream. We're all sat in here today because we're interested in the loudness and we want to make it work. The last thing we want is a consumer electronics manufacturer as well, just to put on a sausage maker at the end of the very system. But I think, this is actually the subject for a later presentation, so I'll leave it to that later presentation today. And lastly, I just wanted to kind of share with you a little window into my life and my aspirations with regard to loudness. So this is what sits under my TV at the moment at home. Content can arrive by any number of directions. So we got it via shiny disc here, via satellite. Yes, I am a satellite user, and I do pay an inordinate some amount of money. Via a terrestrial network, via the TV, or via IP to the PS3, the Xbox, or even the little Apple TV that you might be able to see there on top of the Wii. We're soon to be expanding to include an IP-capable TV here, and an IP-capable AVR as well, giving us access to even more material via that particular route. And also without having to find the right application on any of these particular devices. So as it turns out, an 8-way Ethernet switch isn't going to cut it here. I'm going to have to jump to 16 for it to be big enough to cope. But really, just in summary, I want to say, once I don't need to touch my remote controls volume buttons between the source devices, and I can sideload or stream from these devices to portable devices, whilst we're still maintaining loudness across all those devices, I'll be happy that we've all done a good job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.